Hello, world, and welcome to WonderBuzz. I'm your host, Nate Larson, and I'm very happy to have you with me for episode 3, otherwise known as episode Trace. My Spanish teacher, Senor Ricoh, is going to be very impressed with me right now. WonderBuzz has been downloaded in 32 countries so far, which is super exciting. So, welcome to everybody. And for those new listeners, WonderBuzz is a podcast about adventure travel, van life, photography, and curiosity. I say that like I've made more than 3 of these, but we are going to find out together what WonderBuzz is all about. In today's episode, I'm going to explore the hierarchy of sleeping locations when you are living on the road. I'm also going to go way back to talk about my first experiences with photography and why I think it is such a wonderful form of art. And I will end the podcast with a poem. Unless I change my mind, we'll find out when we get there. Let's get into the show. Before we get into today's topics, I had a few listener questions come in this week. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. One question I received: what is the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself over the last 2 years? Ooh, well, that's... The answer to that question could be an entire podcast, and it might be a little bit what WonderBuzz is about. I've learned a lot. I've learned that locomotion and travel and that sense of forward movement really does feed my curiosity and my creativity. I think one thing that really stands out is that people are good and hospitable and generous everywhere you go. And seeing that over and over and over again is a nice antidote to the divisive and invasive noise that's being blasted at us all day long. So I think those are just a couple quick thoughts that come to mind. Great question. Thank you. Another question that came in: what is the most difficult thing to plan or anticipate in your travels? This is a great segue to my next topic for today. There is a bit of a cognitive load that comes with traveling full-time. It can be an endless series of decisions and logistics. And I think sometimes the most difficult thing to plan can be where to sleep. And that's what we're going to dive into next. Thanks for the questions that came in this week. If you want to submit a question for future episodes, just email me at podcast@nathanlarson.com or send a telepathic message, whichever feels best for you. One of the topics I'm asked about the most is where to park the van at night for sleep. So where do I park the van for nighty-night sleepy time? That's a major decision that I'm always making when living on the road. It is a very subjective area since everyone has different goals or interests with van life or overlanding. So this is going to be my personal take on the best and worst places to get some Z's in Van Halen. I'm going to run this list from my worst to my best. So coming in at number 6 in the bottom is what I'll call side street camping or stealth camping. This is when you park illegally and just try to blend in and not look like anyone is sleeping in the vehicle. It works with more plain, nondescript vans, but Van Halen does not exactly blend in. So you're often risking what is referred to as the knock, when the police come and move you along, and that is just a pain in the middle of the night. And depending on the interaction, sometimes it can actually lead to tickets. So I am putting that lowest on my list just for the sheer inconvenience. However, I have done it. One particular time that stands out to me was when I was passing a construction site that was just full of trade vehicles, plumbers, electricians, all these vans basically. And it was the weekend, so they were all parked in a big long row across from the construction site, and I was able just to back Van Halen right into that line of Sprinter vans, and nobody bothered me for the weekend. Coming in at number 5, truck stops and rest stops. Now, these are fine in a pinch, but they are very loud, and there are a lot of lost souls wandering around. And the ambiance is not what I would call alluring. So the pros are the proximity to bathrooms and Diet Coke. The cons are the general noise level and just kind of humanity. Coming in at number 4, and this one may be a little controversial, is RV campgrounds. I've never stayed in one the entire 2 years I've been out, so I should probably shut my pie hole, but it's just really not my scene. I know this is the number one preferred choice for many people who travel just because of the convenience and the support systems that are in place at RV campgrounds. But for me, this stays in the non-preferred options. And maybe I should try it before I judge it, but I don't want to. Coming in at number 3 are retail parking lots. Again, this is all in my if you have to category. So Cracker Barrel, Bass Pro, Cabela's, Walmart, Planet Fitness, casinos, all of these across the country allow you to park in their parking lots overnight. Now, there are exceptions, and some of them are posted and you can't, so you have to check or get permission. But in general, these are options as you travel across the country. To be clear, this is still in my worst case scenario part of my list, but these are places that can really work for you if you are in a bad situation or there's an emergency or you really just can't find anywhere else to stay. They're definitely more chill than a truck stop, usually, although I have some Walmart stories. And there's less of that sardine experience that you might feel like you're going to have in an RV campground. Now we move into the preferred part of my list, my top 2. Coming in at number 2 are national park campgrounds and state parks. They're still not my favorite, but they are usually run really well, and even the busy ones, which is almost all of them now, you still feel like you're in nature and you can get to the backcountry very quickly. A lot of them are located next to trails or actually have trails that leave right from the campgrounds. And recreation.gov has actually turned into quite a good booking site. I will say that some parks do charge quite a bit for what they offer. And there are some parks that are definitely very, very crowded. Their campsites are very, very crowded. But in general, this would be my number 2 option. And coming in at number 1 for me, the wild. This is where I spend the vast majority of my time in the van, definitely over 90%. To me, this includes Bureau of Land Management land, national forests, wildlife management areas like the one I'm recording in right now. You're often alone in these areas, or at least have a lot of space between you and other campers or vehicles. The wildlife management area I'm in right now, I haven't seen anyone in 2 days, and I think this one is about 20 or 30,000 acres. I like being able to exit the van and just go hiking or wandering, and these areas are usually better for stargazing when compared to a Love's truck stop or a Walmart parking lot. But the Diet Coke is much farther away, something to keep in mind. There are some great apps for van life and traveling overland, or even if you're just on vacation and want to try some of these places out. I will mention 2 today. One app is called iOverlander, and another one is called Harvest Hosts. iOverlander is free, it's crowdsourced, it's info for all types and styles of travelers, and it's very useful for finding the best spots that are really out of the way, too. There's a whole bunch that I haven't mentioned in this list, and iOverlander is really good for finding those kind of unique out-of-the-way spots. The second app I'll mention today is Harvest Host, which does require a membership. However, it's quite modest. And it does include a network of listings from farms to golf clubs, breweries, private homes, all these places that allow you to book approved dates for stays in their parking areas. Now, there's no charge at the sites themselves, but Harvest Host does encourage you to buy something at each of the locations. So, say you're at a microbrewery, they encourage you to go in and have a meal or play a round of golf at a golf course. I tend to stay on farms almost every single time I'm using this app, which does have one major downside. It means that I'm buying things at farm stands. And I think at one point last year, I had at least 5 different types of jams and preserves just filling up my fridge. Now, that's a lot for one person. I guess it's not such a bad downside now I'm thinking about it, but there are no cookie farms, Harvest Hosts. Help me find the cookie farms on your app, please. Let's get on this. When I was 12 years old, my parents bought me a Ricoh KR10 35mm camera. This was from Ritz Camera in Southbury, Connecticut. The camera had one 50mm lens, and later I got a telephoto lens, which at the time basically made me a National Geographic photographer. I also bought this small book from Kodak that was a pocket guide or a field guide that had this series of lessons in it around how to compose photographs, how to use 35mm cameras, really the general basic rules of photography. Looking back on it now, These are rules that I often purposely try to break, but it's such a great foundation, that book. And I actually still have that little pocket guide and that camera. When I got the camera home, I set out into the backyard of our house and started making photographs of what I was seeing that inspired me. A small brook, dried leaves on the woodland floor, all the different textures on the water and on the trees and in nature around me, the light and the contrast shining through the trees and filtering through the leaves, this light that really paints the forest. And this was the beginning of my obsession with flowers that is still going 40 years later. At the same time, I met Mrs. Nash. We moved to Connecticut midway through my school year, and I was assigned to Mrs. Nash as my homeroom teacher. And every morning I sat in her classroom and dealt with all the joys of being the new kid. She had this fiery red hair, and in my recollection, she was very much over tolerating the craziness that is a middle school classroom in the morning. However, she also ran the school photography club and the darkroom, and she loved photography. I immediately found my way into whatever photography activities she was running, and in the darkroom, she really came alive as a teacher for me. She taught me all about exposure and cropping, dodging, burning, double, triple, quadruple exposures, film types, paper choices, chemical compositions that change your prints. And I had this realization right from the start that making photographs for me was going to be the intentional choice of how to compose the photograph in my little Ricoh camera, but also that final image that I could see in my mind that was part of the editing process and that continued creative process in the darkroom. Our tools now are so amazing for post-processing photos, but that same core set of concepts or lessons that I learned in the darkroom with Mrs. Nash are still the way I process photos today. I very much think about it as a digital darkroom. One of the reasons that I love photography is that it holds this unique position in the realm of visual arts. And that is due to its ability to preserve moments from our reality. Unlike other visual art forms that only rely on interpretation or abstraction, and photography can definitely do that too, photography is unique in that it offers a direct representation of the world. So I think this immediacy fosters emotional engagement with the viewer. Photographs can stretch back in time and they can connect us to our past. I think we've all felt that before. We have experienced how photographs can evoke sensory memories for us. But photographs can also make you feel immediately connected to people that you have never met before and places that you have never visited before. And that is some pretty powerful art. I think photographs can convey very complex narratives, but at the same time, they're very accessible and they're universally understood by people. And in that way, photography kind of serves as this unique tool for storytelling and exploration, and it allows us to really highlight perspectives that may otherwise go unnoticed. So even through the lens of that little first Ricoh camera that I had, I was learning to tell stories from my own perspective and to share emotions in my own language. And to me, this capacity to document and share that vast range of human existence and human emotions in our natural world really fosters empathy. I think photography does an amazing job with that. So it is definitely something I think about when I'm making my naturalist photographs, that desire to encourage a sense of a place in people and make them feel a connection to our environment. And emotion or feeling is definitely what leads my thinking when I'm editing most of the time as well. So this is not to say that one type of art is better than another. Bring it all on. Like all great art, photography transcends language and it offers a visual discourse that stretches across all different backgrounds. And that is truly amazing. So I want to thank Mrs. Nash for inspiring me right when I was beginning to learn photography about the questions to ask and the approaches you could take, and really just how to open your mind for where your photographs could go beyond what you were capturing in the camera. Thank you, Mrs. Nash. Because I've mentioned Diet Coke on this episode, I thought I would read one of the more humorous poems I have written recently, and it's in the spirit of William Blake, and it is called All the Sweeter. O nectar of celestial desire, bright liquid of electric flame and sweet deceit, chemical angels dance on thy aluminum rim, a silver chariot bears forbidden nectars, aspartame's brilliant sword cuts through mortal will, caffeine-infused spirits whisper eternal cravings. From refrigerator's dark sanctum thou callest me. Behold, the fizzing of my addiction must rise. 12 ounces of madness, 0 calories of lies. My kidneys tremble as my dentist weeps in fear. I stand possessed and caress thy aluminum frame. That was my very important poem called All the Sweeter. You can find more of my poetry on my blog at nathanlarson.com. Thanks for joining me today on WonderBuzz. If you would like to see my photography or buy prints, please head over to nathanlarson.com. Or if you want holes poked in your eyes by tornadoes and fire ants to invade your skull, you can find me on social media, where I'm everywhere, including at Nathan Larson Photo on Instagram. If you have your own adventures or creative stories you'd like to share or questions for me, I would love to hear them. Reach out to me at podcast@nathanlarson.com. Keep exploring, stay curious, and I'll see you on the next episode of WonderBuzz.